Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talk It Up Tuesday. So excited to be here today with Kristi Roye from Traffick911, a local organization here in the North Texas area. But before we get started with our conversation, just to take a brief moment and tell you who we are. So I'm with the Turning Point. We are the Rape Crisis Center here in Collin County, and we serve survivors of sexual violence in the North Texas area. We provide counseling, education, and advocacy for all those in need. And we have a 1-800 crisis hotline number that is 1-800-886-7273. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, welcome, Kristi. So excited to have you here. This is a topic I know, trafficking, that has been in the news so much recently. So welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, I wonder if you could start out just by telling us a little bit about what trafficking is and Traffick911 and how you guys work on addressing this situation.
Yeah, happy to. My name is Kristi Roye. I'm the Director of Development at Traffick911. We are a local organization founded in 2009 with the sole mission of freeing youth from sex trafficking. Over the course of our history, our why has never changed, but our how has kind of evolved. The anti-trafficking movement is ever changing. It's a relatively newer movement in terms of service providers and public awareness. And while trafficking has been around probably since the dawn of time, to be honest, it's something that has not received a lot of the attention that it deserves. And so we are here to hopefully fix that. And a lot of my job is bringing awareness to this issue, and specifically for Traffick911 to kids, to minors who are being trafficked. So sex trafficking is different than smuggling or even labor trafficking. The federal definition is an exchange of something of value for sex or sexual acts. And when you're talking about minors, it's anybody who's under the age of 18, so 17 and younger, which is who we serve. And so smuggling is a lot of times kind of confused with trafficking, meaning that you're taking somebody from one place to another illegally. While that does happen a lot in sex trafficking and specifically child sex trafficking, we are really focused on that exchange of value through force, fraud, or coercion with minors. And that's kind of our space that we take up in this movement.
Great. Well, thanks so much for explaining that. I know that concept of smuggling and trafficking can get so confusing here
Totally.
when you watch things on the news or just see things in popular culture. So you guys are located here in the North Texas area, and I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about the most common dynamics you see with child sex trafficking here in North Texas.
Yeah, so we are located here in North Texas. We serve kids in 6 counties, and we're the only organization that is providing crisis response in all of those counties. And so the way that trafficking happens, there's really no face of trafficking, no A through Z story of trafficking. Every story is really unique. And it's one of the reasons that our services are so individualized. And when I talk today about kind of what we offer, I'm talking from the lens of our experience and how we've served kids. And so I always kind of give that caveat, because if there are survivors who are watching or other community partners who are watching, I never want to speak in absolutes, because we know that there is no absolute when it comes to this, right? So in our experience, most of the time, kids that are trafficked are coming from areas, homes, communities where there are systemic barriers. And so they've probably already been victimized in some way or another, whether that's through poverty or homelessness or housing insecurity. Racism plays a huge role in trafficking. And because trafficking is the exploitation of vulnerability, it can live anywhere. Kids are vulnerable by their nature. Their brains are not developed. They are reliant on other people to care for their needs. And so when those needs are not being met, And a trafficker, they're so smart, and we hate to admit that, right? But they know what to look for. They know the signs better than any of us do. And so, especially with the rise of technology and social media, it's so easy for traffickers to identify a kid who may not be receiving the attention that they need. Maybe they are experiencing food insecurity or homelessness, and they're looking for a way out. And so traffickers are able to identify those vulnerabilities and prey on kids who are looking for a dream and who are looking for safety. And that happens everywhere in every community, rich, poor, white, Black, Hispanic. It doesn't matter. There is no kind of one size fits all story for each of these victims that we serve.
Right. So I wonder, sometimes I think in popular culture, we have this idea, as I mentioned before, of kidnapping or smuggling, or these instances that probably do occur, but are so sensationalized and dramatized. What do you see as most common here in the North Texas area? And does it change as you kind of move out from the urban areas into the more suburban areas, sort of the dynamics and maybe the role that community and family tends to intersect with some of the cases that you see?
Sure. So a lot of times when people think of trafficking, they think of kidnapping. The truth is that in our experience, that just doesn't happen. It's not to say that it hasn't and that there aren't cases here or across the country where that is happening. But in the time that I've been at Traffic 911, we've heard of one case that was, legally kidnapping. She ended up knowing this person, but was taken from an unsafe place. And so speaking of Taken, that movie, right? Like everybody, that's the first thing that they think of is Taken. And it was probably the first introduction for a lot of us into sex trafficking, just as an idea that existed in the world. And so, yeah, I mean, kidnapping and all of those things, while it's really easy for us to assume that that's how this happens, it's a lot easier to digest that, right? That there's bad people that are just going to snatch your kids off the sidewalks. The truth is that this is happening by building trust and by building relationship. Relationships are more times than not what we see the kind of catalyst for trafficking. And when you can build a relationship and trust with a kid, saying that that you are going to care for them, that you're going to love them, these are people that just know, we call them street psychologists. They know the human condition. And so when they are able to identify those cracks and those vulnerabilities, that is how trafficking happens. It happens through building relationship and through building trust. And then there's this psychological captivity that happens. Kids are not being locked in cages. They're not being, closed behind doors and houses. Again, there are those fringe cases that happen, but more times than not, it's a psychological captivity that occurs where they fear for their safety. They fear for the safety of their family or for their friends. They might not have anybody else in the world that cares about where they are or what they're doing. And so there truly is no hope for them. And so that when that happens, it's like the perfect storm of all of these things and all of these beliefs that occur for somebody to just swoop in and to sell them a dream and to sell them something that they think is going to change their lives for the better. Now, urban versus suburban, at the end of the day, people are people. And when you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are a lot of things that physical needs that exist most of the time in urban areas. Again, poverty and homelessness and racial issues, systemic racism. But all of these things exist everywhere in affluent areas and in areas of poverty. And so you can talk about, kids from an affluent background, they're not necessarily affected by systemic barriers. like those who may be living in an urban setting, but they still undergo the same life processes and brain development of being a teenager. And all of those things come down to its own set of vulnerabilities. When we talk about teenage brains, you can live in a great neighborhood with wonderful parents, and there's still going to be times that you want to run away from home. There's still going to be times that you feel frustrated with the decisions being made for you. And so when all of those things kind of jumble together and spin out, the need to fit in, self-esteem issues, lack of attention at home, all of these things, all vulnerabilities everywhere, can lead to a trafficker exploiting them.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, because I think that sometimes the stereotypes that people have in mind can actually be barriers to maybe recognizing what's happening within the communities themselves. So moving into that, so I know that we work with you guys when we conduct our sexual assault nurse examinations on pediatric cases. So just looking from maybe the hospital perspective or that of school staff or even community members, what are the sort of red flags or signs that might indicate someone was involved in this, as you put it, psychological captivity in this trafficking and exploitative situation?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize what you said, Amy, about when we believe these things and we sensationalize these things, it makes victims feel unseen and invisible. Because if we're only talking about kidnapping, if we're only talking about being locked in cages, if you're being trafficked and you don't fit into those boxes, you're thinking, well, I'm not a victim. I'm here and he's not locking me up every night. I'm free to come and go. I carry a designer bag. When we recognize those things, and when we're able to kind of provide a more holistic view of sex trafficking, I think that it allows victims to identify and self-identify more. And so I think that's the first thing that we can do, is just anything that you think about child sex trafficking, just wipe it out from your brain, and start fresh. The best thing that you can do is learn. We've been in this movement for almost 15 years and we're still learning all the time. It's a constant changing world. And a lot of that comes from, access to the internet. It comes from new websites and new apps that are popping up all the time, new language, and giving victims voices, and hearing from survivor leaders who maybe for the first time are realizing that they are survivors, and allowing them to tell their stories. When we can learn from all of those things, we're going to be in such a better place to identify those red flags. So the first thing that I tell groups when I'm speaking is follow your gut. If something seems off, if there's a weird feeling, and I know sometimes that's easier for some of us. I've always been kind of a gut person. Like, you can kind of, my husband and I joke when we go to dinner, like we don't even talk to each other because we're listening to all the conversations around us. We're like eavesdropping at the table next to us. But when you're aware and attuned to your community around you, that's the very best thing that you can do. Know your community, like get outside of your bubble. Take your AirPods out whenever you're walking through the grocery store. Listen to what's happening around you, and have your eyes open to things that feel off, that relationship, there's a power dynamic. That girl is dressed like she's 25, but her face looks like a baby. She looks 15 or 16. All of those things are going to start to really open your eyes and your heart to the community around you. And then really start thinking about, like, what are the actual signs, right? Branding, there's tattoos that mean things. Start kind of learning what those tattoos mean, and some language. Language is such a huge part of sex trafficking. It's something that I really had to learn whenever I came into this movement is kind of what are some of those terms that kind of, your ears perk up a little bit when somebody is talking about their homeboy or their boyfriend or their husband or their wifey. All of a sudden you're going, okay, this isn't just like joking, this isn't just teenagers saying things, like there's something more here. And then also relationships, when relationships are the core of this, how are people interacting within the relationships around them? It's one thing for teenagers to be dating and they're all excited and giddy and they're talking about this person, but when that one person becomes the only thing they're talking about, when their friends are starting to drop off, when maybe they have one or two people around them and everyone else is isolated, those are things that kind of send up red flags. Like maybe there's a weird power dynamic here, or maybe there's something happening where they feel like they have to give all of their attention to this one person and there's not a balance of other people in their lives. And then obviously, and I always say, like, teenagers hate me when I come and speak to parents, because it's like, look at your kids' phones really, truly. I mean, know who they're talking to. So much happens online now and it's invisible, and traffickers know that. And so when you are able to see what's being said and what's being sent, your adult brain is going to fire off red flags faster than your teenager's brain. And so when you're talking about kids as young as 13 who are speaking to adults, they are just not aware of what to look for or what may feel weird to them. So definitely, I know that I always am like, I'm so sorry to the teenagers, because I'm like, your parents need to be in your business, they need to know who your people are. And I think that there's a healthy balance of that that you can find. But one of the best resources that I love to promote is a website called Culture Reframed. It was founded by Dr. Gail Dines. She's a fantastic researcher on the effects of pornography in our hypersexualized culture. Her resources are so phenomenal, so modern. It's not like, our terrible sex talks and books that we had when we were kids. It really talks about the world we live in today, and I cannot recommend it enough. She's a fantastic resource. And for parents and those who interact with teenagers that are watching, I can't recommend them enough.
I did a deep dive after you sent me the links yesterday, and as a parent, so fantastic. And we'll make sure and put all the links to any resources you have in below this video or on our YouTube. So I guess you've talked a little bit about the vulnerabilities that children might have. You've talked a little bit about the role that technology plays in this, because it's so complicated, and I think it only magnifies the depth and complexities of dealing with this issue. But are there any other major challenges that you think it's really important to highlight here?
Yeah, I think that just understanding what trafficking is, it's something that we butt up against all the time. And it truly is. I know it sounds so simple, but it really is one of our biggest barriers, because a lot of times, even some of the partners that we work with or people who are well-meaning will shrug off something where we are going, alert, alert, something's wrong, because we see this and we, live, sleep, eat, and breathe this all day long. Our spidey senses are tingling, and other people may think like, oh, she's 17, she can sleep with whoever she wants. But she's 17, she's a kid, she's a teenager. And so I think when you can learn and really understand what this issue looks like, and really just the complexity of it, and open your heart to realize that, these kids are not given a choice a lot of times. When you can start there and just learn, I think it is the biggest barrier that can be broken down. And it's the simplest thing to do. Follow organizations on social media. Take anti-trafficking orientations. We host one every other month. The Net in Fort Worth hosts a great one. Unbound hosts lots of trainings. I mean, there are so many organizations that are here to help. And so I think when you can really dive in and find your place, it doesn't have to be on the front lines. It doesn't even have to be, talking about stories and serving kids or giving. I have a good friend who the first time we met, she was like, I creeped on you on LinkedIn. I know what you do. I don't want to talk about it. I found my place and it's in anti-pornography. We can talk about that all day long, but I can't hear your stories. And I'm like, yes, great. Let's talk about that, because that means that you've already done the research to figure out what makes your heart beat fast, what makes you excited about your role in this movement, because we all truly do have a place in this fight. I mean, it's about the safety of our kids. It's about the safety of our communities. It's about the safety of our families. And so I think that it's really important that that's the first step that everyone takes.
That so aligns with so much of the work that we do here,
Mhm.
because we know as an organization that works with survivors of sexual violence that family connectedness, community connectedness are huge protective factors
Yes.
against all forms of sexual violence. And they're absolutely critical if
Mhm.
someone is a survivor and that healing journey through
Yeah.
that. So I wonder if there's anything else that you can suggest that for our community here that we can do to enhance both the protection, and I'm sure some of that comes through just conversations and this education that you talked about, both in terms of supporting survivors as well as protecting and creating communities where we can prevent the type of vulnerabilities or this type of violence before it occurs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, learning is going to be the first step, but something that's a little bit untraditional, that's a a practice that we've adopted at Traffic 911. It's a phrase that we call free people, free people. It's kind of our internal mantra, um, meaning that the work starts with us. If we are not on our own journey and working within ourselves to figure out what exists within us that may be different than the victimization that we see every day, but we all have our flaws, right? We all have things we need to work through. And I think when you can start identifying and pulling apart all of those things that are within us, personally for me, over the last probably 10 years, I realized that there were some things that I had been maybe taught or believed as a kid that weren't right. And it wasn't of any fault of anybody. I wasn't, raised with these biases, but just through my life and the privilege that I have, they were just kind of built as little bricks within my mind. And it took a lot of time and a lot of self-work to realize that those things existed. And it changed my view of the world. I saw a 17-year-old on the side of the street who looked different than me and had tattoos head to toe, and thought like, ugh, what is she doing? Like, get your life together. And now I look at that person and I think, what has happened in your life? Is there something that's going on? Is this just a form of self-expression? Just because you look different than me doesn't mean that I'm better, or that I have it all figured out, because I don't. And so I think that when you can really identify some of those things that they're just unconscious, they exist inside of us. But when we can pull all of that apart, the view of our world, and just like you said, your community and your family system, it's all going to shift and it's all going to change for the better. And our minds and our hearts are going to be more open to see people differently. And that's really what this issue comes down to, is to seeing people differently and recognizing humanity. Because if we can recognize the humanity in these kids, then people will not buy them for sex, because all of a sudden they're humans and they look like their own daughters or their nieces or their kids' friends. And when we can recognize the humanity in each of these kids that we serve, our viewpoint on the world is going to change, and we're going to be more open to serving them and to loving them. And to kind of, the last piece of our program is community reintegration. And I'm like, when we can get there and, open up a community's eyes to accept these kids with open arms and say it's not your fault. What happened is not your fault. Then that we've made it, right? Like that's all that I can ask for. But it takes so much work on the other side. It's not just the recovery, getting somebody out of an unsafe place in an unsafe situation. There's so much work that has to be done on the other side of it.
Yeah, so this is definitely not a short term, not an immediate
So,
work. It is investment of ourselves, of our resources, of our community,
yeah,
both in terms of prevention, in terms of strength, and in terms of, I love that idea of reintegration, because ultimately that's what we're trying to move towards, is this thriving, safe community that
yeah.
protects especially the most vulnerable. So Kristi, thank you so much for taking your time on this Tuesday and speaking with us. If there's anything else that you have to add, we'll make sure and put all of your information in the notes so that people can learn more about your organization. But if you have any final words.
No, just thank you so much. This is just watching this is a step in the right direction, and it really truly takes all of us. So grateful for the partnership at the Turning Point, and for all of you who are watching and interested in learning more. Super grateful for you all.
Great. Well, thank you all. And we will be back here next week on a different topic. But Kristi, enjoy the rest of your week. Take
Thanks
care.
so much, Amy.
Bye-bye.